Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Analysis. I'm Maz Patel. The renewed Israeli offensive on Gaza continues apace with threats that it is about to become even more brutal, if that's even imaginable. Only this week, the starving Gazans saw a school bombed twice in the matter of a few hours. We have this report on that incident.
School sheltering displaced Gazans was struck by the Israeli military a second time in a few hours. Medics said on Tuesday, the first strike killed 20 people, while 9 others were killed hours later in the second airstrike. People rushed to evacuate the injured and put out the fires. Israeli military strikes killed at least 46 Palestinians across Gaza on Tuesday, local health authorities said. Medics said at least 29 people, including women and children, were killed at a school housing displaced families in the Baraj camp in the central Gaza Strip. In the wake of the first airstrike, the Israeli military said it had struck terrorists operating from a command center that they used to store weapons and plan and stage attacks against Israel. There was no immediate army comment on the latter attack on the school.
Today, we'll be talking to a representative from UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, about the deepening humanitarian crisis in Gaza. However, for Palestinian baby Janan al-Askafi, it became another victim of malnutrition in Gaza. Lack of food is severely affecting children, pregnant women and people with chronic conditions since the food deliveries were stopped in March. It is also delaying the recovery of patients with serious war injuries as aid stocks near depletion, several agencies have said. Rachel Graham has more.
4-month-old Janan al-Askafi died in Gaza on Saturday after malnutrition and digestive problems. Her doctor said she could not be treated because of a total Israeli blockade that aid agencies believe is undermining the health of the entire Palestinian population in the enclave. I was torn into 1,000 pieces, Janan's mother says. The baby needed hypoallergenic milk formula, a common product now absent in Gaza, to help her with chronic diarrhea that caused malnutrition. Ultimately, she was too weak to fight infection and lost nearly half her body weight in her final days, according to her doctor. The war began on October 7th, 2023, when Hamas killed 1,200 people and took 251 hostage, according to Israeli tallies. Israel has since cut most supplies, and its campaign has killed more than 52,000 Palestinians, mostly civilians, according to Hamas-run health authorities. Although Israel allowed more aid into the enclave during a ceasefire from January, it imposed a total blockade when its devastating military campaign resumed in March. International aid agencies warn of an unfolding catastrophe. UN humanitarian agency OCHA says more than 2 million people face severe food shortages. That's the vast majority of Gaza's 2.3 million population. Malnutrition is severely affecting children, pregnant women, and people with chronic conditions, agencies said. Mohammed Abed is head of the Pediatric Care Department at Gaza's Nasser Hospital.
We have noticed an increase in premature babies these days. This percentage has increased compared to before. We noticed that most of the births during this period are premature births, which are often due to malnutrition and a lack of foodstuff among pregnant women and breastfeeding mothers.
With Gaza's fields inaccessible to civilians and its seas barred to fishermen, the territory depends almost entirely on food from outside. But the last delivery Israel allowed was on March the 2nd, the final day of the ceasefire. Israeli officials have said they do not believe Gaza faces a hunger crisis and that enough aid has entered to sustain the enclave's population, and that they want to stop supplies coming under the control of Hamas. Israel has also said it plans to expand its campaign, deepening distress for displaced Gazans. The Gaza Health Ministry said at least 65,000 children have shown symptoms of malnutrition, And the Gaza government media office said at least 57 people had died as a result of malnutrition since Israel closed the crossings. Both bodies are run by Hamas. The Israeli Prime Minister's office did not immediately respond to a request for comment on the numbers.
Now we'll also look at the Israeli plan to reoccupy Gaza and push its 2.3 million Gazans into an ever-shrinking areas of the Gaza Strip. This horrendous scheme will not be implemented until after Trump's visit to the Middle East next week. Now, in the meantime, the Israeli Defense Force is calling up its reservists. But will Israel be able to enact this plan? It may well be crippled by its own internal weaknesses. Many of the reservists in the IDF are actually failing to report for duty. In some units, the number turning up has fallen below 50%. Last year, the average reservist in combat units served 136 days, compared with as few as 8 days per year before the 7th of October. No wonder there is war weariness. And a poll this week showed that 53% of Israelis think that the expansion of the war is motivated by Netanyahu's own political interests, while only 35% believe the government is acting in the interests of national security. Now, if public opinion remains opposed to the offensive, the government will face increasing difficulty to follow it through. So, joining me to discuss the political aspects is Professor Kamal Hawash, the Palestinian academic and political analyst, and also with the ongoing humanitarian situation, we have Tamara Al-Rifai, the Director of External Relations and Communications from UNRWA. Thank you both for joining me. Professor Hawash, let me start off with you. We are hearing increasingly bellicose language, and also, whilst there have been genocidal statements since October the 7th time period till now, it's now becoming less and less obvious that Benjamin Netanyahu is pulling himself away from the extreme elements, if it can be said they're extreme, because it seems the whole cabinet's extreme, but the extreme elements of his cabinet. He doesn't now deny any longer that Gazans will have to be forced to leave the territory. Tell us what's going on now.
As you said, we have some more extreme elements in the Israeli government, but it's all extremists, including Netanyahu. You listen to his words in his press conferences. The whole of that Israeli leadership don't regard the Palestinians as human beings. In fact, they use the term human animals to describe the Palestinians in order to justify what they were doing when they were claiming self-defense. Now, 18 months after what happened on the 7th of October, this is certainly not self-defense. This is a policy to get rid of the Palestinians, first from Gaza, then the West Bank, maybe East Jerusalem and Israel itself, which the extremists now almost follow in confidence that the United States will support them. You indicated Trump is coming to the region. He could be a really good influence and put pressure on Israel, or tell it, because he can, to stop doing what it does, but it doesn't do that. Mm-hmm. So for someone like Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, to say that Gaza should be destroyed, people should be moved to the south, aid will be then drip-fed by Israel, because the ultimate aim is for the Palestinians to self-transfer out of Palestine, when in reality they've been forced into this because, as some of the news items we have followed today show, I think yesterday 100 people died. I haven't followed up what's happened today, but the whole intention is to make their lives so miserable, for them to lose so many relatives, and want to just keep the ones who are still alive, and therefore they will choose to leave. But I don't hear any Palestinians in Gaza saying they will leave. They say, we are not leaving this land, but Israel is doing its best to force them to do so.
Thank you for that. Tamara Al-Rifai, you're joining us obviously from UNRWA. You have quite an important position there. Tell us about aid agencies and how they're able to operate in this environment. Are your staff still working in Gaza despite everything that's going on? And how are you able to do that?
UNRWA is the largest humanitarian agency in Gaza, and it has a staff corps of about 12,000 extremely courageous Palestinian staff who are running the shelters, distributing the food, working on water plants to provide clean drinking water. So UNRWA has not stopped working. However, over the last 9 weeks, and with the complete blockade, complete siege of Gaza, Gazans, including my colleagues, have not received any food, any water, any medicines, any tents, any blankets, any fuel from outside of Gaza. This has been the longest siege on the Gaza Strip since the beginning of this brutal war 19 months ago now. What my colleagues are saying is that while during the ceasefire there was a stepping up of aid, including food going into Gaza, these results of that ceasefire have completely been undone since the bombing started again about 9 weeks ago, and since no food has been allowed in. So the images that we saw, including that baby that died because of malnutrition, sadly, are becoming more and more frequent. My health colleagues are reporting more and more emaciated babies. And if the babies are dying because of malnutrition, their lactating mothers are not getting enough food either.
Yes.
So it's a hole in Gaza now.
Gamal Houash, it seems that the political and the humanitarian aspects of Israel's punitive actions against the Palestinians are now, if they've ever been as bad as this, are as worse as they can be. However, it doesn't seem to have the impact of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians begging to leave the Strip, as far as we can tell from the images that are coming out of Gaza. Can you tell us why that is?
The attachment to the land is so strong. I mean, the Zionists, the Israelis, claim their attachment to that goes back 3,000 years, when they're all immigrants. I mean, mostly they came from other countries. They were not born there. Those who were Palestinian Jews. And if you see, after the British Mandate, what should have happened, or during it, that there should not have been mass migration into Palestine from Europe, and they came from Europe, and that land should have become independent, just like Jordan and Syria and Lebanon and Iraq. And that the people themselves, they would have been majority Palestinians. And therefore, the attachment to the land is there. This claim that they have such a strong attachment is just not acceptable. The real people of the land are the Palestinians. So the attachment is there. I just want to paint an important picture here.
Sure.
Imagine where we would be today if that ceasefire had held, if we had moved to the second stage and then beyond it to the third stage, we would be in a much, much better place, where people were not dying from starvation. They were not being killed.
Yeah.
Yet things would have been heading towards a complete end to this aggression. I don't call it a war. There are not two sides to this. However, it was Israel which broke the ceasefire, and we must never forget that. And the real problem is that the Western powers that support it, like the UK and the US, allowed it to do it.
Yeah.
They didn't say, no, you must return back to the agreement that you signed. Otherwise, we would be in a much, much better place. Therefore, the whole blame goes to Israel and its supporters, like the UK and the US.
Tamara, the United Kingdom's Prime Minister Keir Starmer in Parliament described his anguish at the plight of the Palestinians in Gaza, yet still refuses to take the action which many of his backbenchers, in fact many parliamentarians, including many Conservatives, are calling for, which is sanctions, etc., and taking real action against Israel. He still believes that there is scope to get a surge of humanitarian aid into the Strip. Do you believe that the British government, in UNRWA's view, being a major funder of UNRWA, is doing enough to ensure that key aid gets into Gaza Strip, for example, to those mothers who are not lactating because they don't have the food, baby feed isn't getting in, and also, obviously, the countless others that are suffering?
As the largest humanitarian agency in Gaza, what we see is the imposing of 9 weeks of complete siege is not acceptable. It is contrary to the laws of war, whereby parties are obliged through the Geneva Conventions to provide humanitarian access and access of access to the population, to food, medicines, etc. What we're seeing here is new Israeli rules to seek to control and restrict independent and impartial humanitarian access. What we are seeing also is that yes, there are many calls of concern. There are very strong statements coming out of countries, of governments, of UN member states, including of the UK. What we are calling for as an aid agency is for real political and diplomatic pressure to break that siege and to bring the food in. So collectively, not enough has been done to put pressure on the government of Israel to allow aid in.
And Professor Hawash, yesterday in Parliament, that was exactly the point made by so many parliamentarians. And it transpires that there was a report in the Guardian newspaper that contrary to the sanctions, the limited sanctions against arms to Israel, there have been a whole load of parts in contravention of those sanctions being received by the Israelis. What's your response to that report? And also, what is your ask of the British government?
I think I put it in a tweet this morning that Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, and David Lammy are complicit in what is happening, what Israel is doing. They're complicit in the crimes, and they should face accountability because they should be, according to the Genocide Convention, they should all be stopping the genocide that is happening, or at least putting so much pressure that genocide doesn't happen. But they refused, for example, to cancel the permits for the parts to the F-35. They know that Israel uses the F-35 jet to drop American bombs, 1-ton bombs on tents. I mean, it just beggars belief that they have no concept of humanity, that when you do that, you are likely to kill a large number of people and actually visually, unfortunately, see so many of them burning and unable to get out of the way. So the ask to the British government, and on the 14th of this month, we are in Parliament for what's called a lobby of Parliament that's organized by the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, where I will be meeting my MP and others will be meeting their member of Parliament to ask them these questions and to say, stop condemning. It is not sufficient to condemn, because every morning we hear that maybe 100, maybe 80 have been killed, and the depravity of the Israelis talking about destroying Gaza. What more do they need before they say we should not keep the Israeli ambassador here in the UK, and everyone should be calling for Israel, which has breached everything, any law you can think of, international law, humanitarian law, or whatever. Why is this state still in the United Nations? It should be thrown out of it, just like South Africa was when it was practicing far less severe crimes than Israel is committing now.
And Tamara, the Israelis say that they will set up sterile areas where, with a biological ID or something along those lines, Palestinians in Gaza who will be moved to the south can access limited stocks of aid to be delivered by private companies. Do you believe, with all your experience, having served this area for so many years as an organisation, that that is a realistic prospect, that we can actually trust that this process will happen and that people will be saved? Because I'll link that to what President Donald Trump said just a few days ago that he will be helping the people of Gaza with more aid.
The UN, in its entirety, including UNRWA, has firmly rejected that plan. The plan contravenes long-established multilateral humanitarian practices that have been tested and that have been criticized but still function around the world. And therefore, this plan seemed designed to reinforce control over life-saving supplies. It endangers people's lives by forcing them to move during the bombing. It discriminates against those who can get to these areas and those who can't, including the most vulnerable, the elderly, the children, the disabled. And mostly, it does not allow for an internationally recognized humanitarian aid system to function.
Yeah.
And I want to reiterate, too, that the blocking of aid over the last 9 weeks by the government of Israel is a war tactic. It creates hunger. It makes hunger be used as a leverage, and it weaponizes aid, and that is not allowed.
Professor Kamal, we're coming towards the end of the programme. Just a final point to yourself. You've obviously been part of organising demonstrations in this country to force or put pressure on the British government and also, to make change throughout the world on this particular issue. After 19 months of this incessant assault by the Israeli armed forces, do you believe you're any closer to getting a permanent ceasefire, or is that prospect now gone and we're going to be seeing endless war, endless conflict, because the Israelis simply will not put their weapons down until the last Palestinian has left or been ethnically cleansed from the Gaza Strip?
Well, I think, first of all, these demonstrations were important and are important. And there's another huge demonstration to commemorate the Nakba, which we normally do once a year, but the demonstrations have happened more regularly. They are important to show the strength of feeling amongst the British people and to put pressure on the members of parliament and on the government, even though, as I said, the government is complicit, but the people show them as complicit by continuing to go out. I think the issue of a ceasefire, to be quite honest, the only country that can bring that about is the United States. But what Israel is saying is that effectively they're going to keep things just ticking away until Trump visits the region and returns, and then they'll move to complete this dastardly plan. And I'll also mention that, unfortunately, the West Bank, I talk to people all the time, and the situation there is horrendous, with 50,000 people having been displaced from refugee camps. And we hear today that Jerusalem, that UNRWA schools, unfortunately, have had to be closed in Jerusalem because of Israel wanting to just exclude UNRWA from any work in these areas. So the war is on all the Palestinian people. This is was acknowledged in yesterday's debate, but the government just talks and does absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
As I say, the first thing they could do is to expel, or at least call the Israeli ambassador and tell her to tell its government that they must stop and go back to that ceasefire that was in place 60 days ago.
Thank you very much, Professor Kamal Hawash. Final word to you, Tamara. Tamara, are you hopeful yourself that the people of Gaza will receive the aid however it arrives, whether it's the Americans or the Israelis, or whether it's international aid agencies? Or do you believe that Gaza is on the verge of famine and starvation?
What I see is that Gaza is already in a full-blown humanitarian situation. So it's not about the verge anymore. We're in the middle of it.
Okay.
But I also saw that when there's political will, there's a ceasefire that stretched a few weeks and that saw 500 trucks of aid going in. And that is what we should continue to pressure the international community and governments for.
Well, thank you to both our guests, Professor Kamal Hawash and Tamara Al-Rifai from UNRWA. I've been your host, Maz Patel, and this has been innAnalysis. See you again soon.